Last week we just got into chapter 7 a little bit. So let's go back and review where we're at, and then we'll talk about three of the patriarchs. At the end of chapter 6, which only had two subjects, the feeding of the Hellenistic Jews and Stephen's arrest. Stephen was one of the 7 deacons chosen. He was also had hands laid on him. He had the gift of the Holy Spirit. He was doing miracles and he was preaching the gospel. And there was a group of freed slaves called from the synagogue of the freed slaves. And they took offense to what Stephen was teaching. Stephen was teaching that Jesus was the Christ and that he came to save us from our sins, and that it was he who the Old Testament scriptures spoke about. There isn't another one. And he also must have taught that everything in the Old Testament, since Jesus has come and his kingdom is established, has been fulfilled. There's nothing that I know about in the Old Testament that has not been fulfilled. These are some of the things that Stephen would have been speaking about. And he would have also spoke that the law has been fulfilled. We are now moving on to something much better. Rather than trying to keep 613 laws, which no one could do, we're going to have a grace faith system, much superior. So as Stephen is preaching these things, these guys get upset about it. They bring in false witnesses. He's arrested and he's brought before the Sanhedrin. And there, the high priest says, "Are these things so that these guys are accusing you of?" Rather than saying, "Where's your evidence for this?" He says, "Are these things so?" And that's kind of sort of where we left off. He's in front of the Sanhedrin, and now he's going to make his defense. And as oh, wait a minute here. One more? Okay. So the high priest said, "Are these things so?" And he said, "Hear me, brothers and fathers." Isn't it interesting that he's been arrested, probably roughed up, and brought before this group of, I've used the word gangsters, but that's what they were. And now he's going to make his defense, and rather than saying, "You bunch of meatheads," he says brothers, or he says brethren and fathers. He is respectful to those people who in just a little while are going to want him dead. And so the point being that should we ever be put in that position, we should be respectful too. As much as difficult as that might be, and as much as you might want to really speak your mind, it's always to an advantage to be pleasant and well-mannered and gentlemanly, which is what Stephen is being. He says, "The God of glory," that means majesty, magnificence, "appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia." Mesopotamia, let's go here. Okay, and then we can do that. Let me put my glasses on so I can see where the is. Okay, this map has it down here a little bit. Down here. Let's just follow the map on the wall. See that little red line? He was called from the Ur of the Chaldees, which is just north of the Persian Gulf in what is called the Fertile Crescent. People don't live where they can't grow food. It's just that simple, and that is a very rich area. You can see that both the Tigris and the Euphrates are there. Every spring they would overflow their banks and bring this wonderful silt. So that was a very rich farmland. By the way, the land we're standing on is even richer than that. The Kent Puyallup Valley are the richest farmland in the world, and we're paving over it. Anyway, so he is called from the Ur of the Chaldees. God says, get away from your family to a place which I will show you. And he and his father and his family go up to Haran, which is way up at the top, up by Paddan-Arman. And they stay there until Abraham's father dies, Terah. And at this point, Abraham is 75 years old. He's no spring chicken anymore. And they have marched from the Ur of the Chaldees up to Haran. That's 2,200 miles. That's a long ways. No, I'm sorry. It's not 2,200 miles. It's 1,400 miles. We'll finish the 2,200 miles off down here in Israel or in the land of Canaan. So anyway, he stays there until his father passes away, and then God calls him again. So he's been called twice now. And he goes down to Bethel or thereabouts. And I just broke this thing. Wow. Okay. He comes down here to Bethel and Shechem and in that area. And God makes him a promise. Just a minute. So he told him to leave his country and his father's house to a land which he would show him. And he didn't know where he was going. Had no clue what he was doing. It reminds me a little bit of Dennis Conner. Dennis Conner was the first American to lose the America's Cup. So 4 years later, he tries to win it back, and they were trying to make sails. And he didn't know what they were doing. So they called them Weebies, standing for we be not knowing what we be doing. And that was with Abraham. We be not knowing where we're going. But he was guided. And in this land, Abram had no inheritance. God told him, I'm going to give this to your inheritance. Well, wait a minute, I don't have any inheritance because I don't have any kids. So God made him three promises in Genesis 12:3. He promised him that his people, I'm having a senior moment here, that his descendants would inherit that land, that he would have a son, and that through one of his descendants, all the families of the earth would be blessed. So I think that's about where we left off last week. He did say, but he gave him no inheritance. Let's do this. But he gave him no inheritance. Oops, wait a minute. Yeah, he gave him no inheritance, not even a foot of ground. And yet, even when he had no children, he promised that he would give him as a possession to his descendants after him. So his descendants were going to inherit the land of Canaan, Israel. But first of all, they had to have some descendants. So through God's providence, he sends them down into Egypt. And he said, these people are going to mistreat you. But I will judge them, and I will bring you out, and they will have this land. In verse 6, it says, but God spoke to the effect that his descendants would be aliens in a foreign land and that they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. I remember when Bill was teaching this and Andrew before him, no amount of controversy here, but the 430 years, in my mind, breaks up into two halves. There's a half when God promised Abraham a son, the land, and through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. That was a promise that he made. And for 215 years, that would be from Abraham to Joseph, one of his descendants. The events that transpired took all of Abraham's descendants, 70 of them, and took them down into Egypt. It said they would be aliens in a foreign land for 400 years. And there are those that think, oh, the 430 years was all in Egypt. And I don't want to get into that because we discovered that probably it's 215 years in Egypt and not all of that as a slave, not as slaves. I got it down to about 135 years. But in the Samaritan Pentateuch, it says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel and of their fathers, which they sojourned in the land of Canaan and Egypt, was 430 years. The land of Canaan was a satellite of Egypt. Egypt ruled it like it ruled a lot of those nations around them. So to say that they sojourned in a foreign land, they did. And then God went on to tell Abraham that they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years, and whatever nation to which they will be in bondage, I will judge them. And after that, they will come out and serve me in this place. I don't recall God ever judging Egypt. Did God judge Egypt? Anybody? Yeah, just slightly. And you know, I got to tell you, when you read the account in Exodus, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And Moses had a staff, which he threw down and became a snake. Remember when he picked it up the first time, it scared him. Would me too. And Moses' snake, and Pharaoh's magicians were as good as Moses. They threw down their staffs and they became snakes too. That's a neat trick if you can do it. But Moses' snake ate their snakes. And then he picked it back up and it became a staff. But here's the clue. Here's a little tidbit. Moses and Aaron told Pharaoh, if you don't let our people go, let my people go, your firstborn is going to die. Now, Pharaoh heard that before he ever saw a gnat or a fly or darkness or anything else. He had heard that. But that boy was stuck on stupid. See, if you see something like a snake eating another snake that had been thrown down, I don't know, I would be impressed. In fact, if you see a big old thing pass you, running past you, let it go, it'll be me, because snakes and I have an understanding. So long before the plagues, Pharaoh knew that his firstborn son was going to die according to these guys. And he paid that no attention. None. Nada. Mike, you were going to say something? I needed to.
Going back to the plagues. You got a mic, Mike? No, you got my mic. Okay.
Going back.
Yeah, just a note on the snakes eating the other snakes. That was a sign to the Egyptians because they worshipped a god who was a god of the snakes, and every plague that they performed ultimately proved the supremacy of Jehovah God over, the Nile, over the blood and all of that. It's an interesting thing.
They worshipped almost anything. And today I saw a show not too long ago. It was about northern India. And in northern India, the largest cobras in the world exist, these king cobras. They can get to be 20, 25 feet long. They're huge. And they worship them. Can you imagine worshiping a snake? Not on your life. Not on your life. So he tells them, God tells Abraham that they're going to be enslaved for 430 years, which means they're going to be wanderers in a foreign land for 430 years. And he says, then I myself will judge them, and then you will come out and serve me in this place. Go.
I was going to say, yeah, no, Adam and Eve worship a snake, and that didn't turn out so good.
Well, I don't know if they worship it, but they sure listen to it. Yeah, no, that didn't work out well at all. It cost them dearly. So he gave him no inheritance, not even a foot of ground, and yet even when he had no child, he promised that he would give it to him as a possession and to his descendants after him. So God made Abraham this promise. Now, Stephen is setting up his crowd. Remember, this is Stephen talking, and he's left a lot of the story out, which I'm trying to fill in. That he would have a son, and that his descendants would possess that land, and that through one of his descendants, all the families of the earth would be blessed. I don't know why the Jews didn't catch that earlier. All the families of the earth would be blessed. But they would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. Oh, okay, we got that. So let's go here. Let's try that again. There we go. And so he gave him the covenant of circumcision. So Abraham became the father of Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob the 12 patriarchs. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. Stephen has just touched a little bit on Abraham, the original Hebrew. Hebrew, by the way, means across the river. And now he's going to skip Isaac, and he's going to skip Jacob, which are both interesting stories, and get right to Joseph, because Joseph is the reason that they went down into Egypt. So he gave him as a covenant, the covenant of circumcision, and so Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac circumcised him on the 8th day, and Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. So who are the 12 patriarchs? Anybody? Well, the sons of Jacob. But their initials are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. There was also a daughter in there, by the way. Her name was Diana. Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, Joseph, and Benjamin, who were the children of Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife and favorite children. Where was I? So he skips over a lot of the story that is in Exodus, or Genesis, I'm sorry. And he says, but the patriarchs became jealous of Joseph. They called him a dreamer, because he had a dream that one day all those guys would bow down before him. Now, if your little brother came up and told you that, you might say, yeah, right. I had a little brother just like that. So the patriarchs became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt. Before they sold him into Egypt, though, they threw him in a well, in a cistern which was empty, intending upon killing him. That's how close he was coming to death. But Reuben, being a good guy, pulled him out and intended to send him back to his father alive. But as it is, they took his multicolored coat, put some blood on it, and gave it to Jacob and said, a wild animal, eat your son. Meanwhile, he was sold into Egyptian slavery. He was sold into the house of Potiphar. Anybody know how old he was at this time? You can't answer. I know you know. He was 17. 17 years old. He was a kid. And yet, as he was sold into Potiphar's house, he took over. He managed all his house. Potiphar could see that God was with him. And he makes mention of that, by the way. I know God is with you. But Potiphar's wife hit on him, and hit on him, and hit on him. And finally she says, this Hebrew is making sport of me. And it said that Potiphar became angry. I don't think he was angry with Joseph. I think he was angry with his wife, because he knew that Joseph was a good and decent man. But that didn't save Joseph. Off to jail he went. Well, the jail was in Potiphar's house too, but that's okay. He's there. And he was there for 13 years. 13 years, including the time that he served Potiphar and then in jail. And they found out that, let's go on. And the patriarchs became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt, and yet God was with him and rescued him from all his afflictions and granted him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all of his household. So to fill in the blanks just a little bit, so he is sold to Potiphar. Potiphar's wife hits on him. He's thrown into jail. And there he makes two interpretations. One for the chief cupbearer and one for the baker. He said the chief cupbearer will be restored to his position and the baker will be hung in 3 days. And ta-da, it happened just that way. And that word got back to Pharaoh. Here's a guy that tells dreams, interpretations. Pharaoh had a dream. And the dream was, he dreamed of 7 fat cows coming out of the Nile and 7 skinny ones coming out of the Nile. What's that mean? So they call in Joseph, who tells them. The fat cows represent 7 fat years, and the lean cows represent 7 lean years, or a famine. Can you see God's handiwork in all this? He's bringing these people down out of Canaan. He's going to put them in the best land in Egypt. They're going to multiply, become a great nation, and then they can go take Canaan, and it would be theirs. Bill.
It's kind of nice to have this version where it just quickly goes over what happens to Joseph, and yet that took a number of years of betrayal by his brothers, and of that in captivity or in servitude and in jail before he actually is exalted by God to lead in Egypt. Yeah. And I just think it's a great example for us to realize that sometimes you just have to wait for God to act. And he waited, and it didn't seem like he lost faith or became impatient. He waited for God to deliver him. And I like the short version, because it gives us an idea that this is something that wait for the God's will to come out and his deliverance to come.
This is the Reader's Digest version. Mike and then Mike. By the way, if you think about patience, think about how long God made a promise to Abraham that he would have a son, and how many years did he have to wait? 24. Go ahead.
So the average person, I did a report on dreams once. The average person dreams 5 times a night. Call them rapid eye movement times. So anyway, when I have dreams, I don't wonder about a lot of them. Some of them are kind of crazy and this kind of thing. I'm assuming, and it's probably not important, but somehow because Pharaoh dreamed 5 times a night too. That's what humans do. And so this one caught Pharaoh's attention. It must have been a vivid dream or just traumatic and moved him emotionally, but obviously it was from God. And so there was something that caught Pharaoh's attention with this dream that perhaps some of his other dreams didn't have. So I'm just thinking that's why he took action, and I have to have somebody tell me what this dream means. And that was God, as you already said, but God was behind that.
And that dream and the interpretation put Joseph in a position to where he could oversee his family, as well as all of Egypt. Go ahead, Mike.
So Stephen is not just, turning to some random place in the Old Testament and telling the story over again. There's going to be we'll see a pattern in these stories of how that the leaders whom God has selected, in this case it's Joseph, and then later on he'll talk about Moses and so on. The leaders whom God has selected, they've turned around and repeatedly, over and over again, the Jews have rejected. And this is not something that, as he's telling these stories, you can just see the temperature, like the frog in the frying pan, going up degree by degree by degree until he gets to the end, when the conclusion that he reaches is one that literally turns him into a murderous mob.
Yeah, it cost him his life. You can see that right now, as Stephen is speaking, that he has them in his hand. Boy, they're really intent. He's saying things they want to hear. Our fathers did this and our fathers did that. But when he gets to Moses was a little different. He had a little trouble with the troops. So Joseph was sold into slavery, came out of that, and became governor of Egypt, the second highest ranking person in the land. And he was 30 years old. He lived to be 110. So he ruled there for 80 years. Now it says, now a famine came over all of Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction with it, and our fathers could find no food. Again, he's got their attention. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our fathers there the first time. And on the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's family was disclosed to Pharaoh. Now we skipped over a lot. I think Joseph had a little fun with his brothers, hiding a cup, and what are you doing that for? You're a bunch of thieves, spies. He had fun with them. And he put Simeon in jail, which makes me think that Simeon was the one that said, let's kill Joseph. That's just my opinion, and you certainly don't have to believe that. But if you do, it shows how smart you are. So he put Simeon in jail for a while. But the point is that they did get food. And Pharaoh told Joseph, go get your father, your family, and bring him down here, and I will give you the best land. The land of Goshen was a really good farmland. In Egypt, they had the black land and the red land. The black land you could farm, the red land you couldn't do anything in. It was good for mining. And he sent our fathers there for the first time. And on the second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and Joseph's family was disclosed to Pharaoh. Again, part of this story is his brothers intended to kill him. They intended to do him harm. And yet he said, later on after they met, he said, I know you intend to do me harm, but God intended this for good. He sent me here before you, so I could take care of you. It takes a big man to acknowledge that, yes, you did intend to do me harm, but this was all part of God's plan. So Joseph's family was disclosed to Pharaoh, and Joseph sent word and invited Jacob, his father, and all his relatives to come to him, 75 persons in all. Moses says 70. So obviously here we have a mistake in the Bible, and it's really not inspired, and let's just throw the whole thing away, get season tickets to the Seahawks, and have a good time. So who are these other 5? How did he know there was 5? Well, the Holy Spirit told him. Ephraim and Manasseh both had 2 sons. So 2 and 2 is 4. Oh, and a grandson makes 5, 75. Oh, no mistake in the Bible at all. But I know some people would argue that here is a mistake. Not a mistake. It's just that he counted people coming from the land of Canaan to Egypt as opposed to those who were already there. At least that's my understanding. Well, that means you're really smart, Mike. Okay, 75 persons in all. And Jacob went down to Egypt, and there he and his fathers died. And they were removed to Shechem and laid in the tomb with Abraham, who had purchased for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor and Shechem. I was on a roll, Bill. Go ahead. What's that?
Said you were at the end of a sentence. What do you mean?
Yeah, but I was still on a
Okay,
roll.
you're still rolling. Joseph is such an example to us in so many ways. I mean, he didn't seek revenge.
Nope.
Could have.
Yep.
A lot of people do. He didn't even seek justice. I mean, it was a crime to sell somebody unlawfully into slavery, and the punishment was death. Mm-hmm. So he could have gone that route. You know, certainly being the position he was in, he could have carried that out. He could have carried out justice. Mm-hmm. But he didn't do that. He chose mercy here. Love and mercy. And I think that's just a wonderful example for us when we're wronged in a way we probably never will be wronged as badly as Joseph was wronged.
Right.
That we should have love and mercy toward those who offended us.
Sometimes I wonder when, and Mike's got a question, sometimes I wonder why these stories are here. They're here so we can learn from them. And if we're ever put in that position, we can be more like Joseph and not be full of hate and vitriol and vengeance. He didn't have any of that in him, and he certainly had a reason to have that.
Yeah. Joseph's revenge was success.
Joseph's revenge was showing his brothers love and kindness and
Right,
taking
but
care of his whole family.
It was the success of the Israelites there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it was, and he told them as much that he couldn't be angry with them because God had put him in that position to save their lives.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. God sent me here before you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful story. It's too bad we couldn't do the whole thing, but we just did it last year, so we won't do it. Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, so to answer the question, why was this written? Like many things that were written, Romans 15:4 says, whatever was written in earlier times was for our instructions, that through perseverance and encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope.
Right. Okay, so Joseph, let me see. Let me do this. But as the time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt. 70 people went down into Egypt. 75 if you count the ones that were there. They became a great nation. When they left, if I'm right, I think there were 600,000 fighting men. Is that right, Lee? About right? So add a wife to each one of those men, and now you got 1.2 million. And if you add just 2 children, you're talking 4 million people. And their families were much bigger than that. So we're talking, a great number of people. And the Egyptians became scared of them. Well, let me follow the scriptures here. But as time of the promise was approaching, which God had assured Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt until there arose another king over Egypt who knew nothing of Joseph. So Joseph at this time has probably passed away. He was 110, and he would have ruled in Egypt probably for 80 years. But let's see, I got it written down here too. Just as soon as I can find it. Yes. There were more than one race of people who ruled in Egypt. Most people think that the Pharaoh that Joseph dealt with was a Semite. But then along came, and that Pharaoh's name, by the way, was Chios. But another Pharaoh named Amos expelled Chios and brought in all Egyptians, no more foreigners. And they didn't know Joseph. They didn't know what he did. So then they said, let's deal wisely with this group of people, which is far too many for us to fight with. Let's enslave them. That'll work. And so they enslaved the people. It says, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt until there arose another king over Egypt who knew nothing of Joseph. And it was he who took shrewd advantage of our race and mistreated our fathers, so they would expose their infants and they would not survive. To be shrewd means to be unjust, cruel, cunning, deceitful, fraudulent. So this Pharaoh took advantage of these people that another Pharaoh had invited down there. And they enslaved them, and they mistreated them, and they worked them. And God saw that. He said, yes, I know my people are in trouble. So it was at this time, now that the children of Israel are being mistreated, they're enslaved, they're beaten, that Pharaoh comes up with this marvelous plan. The Nazis would have been impressed with it. It was he who took shrewd advantage of our race, and exposed their infants so they would not survive. Remember, the story went that he told the midwives that when the Hebrew women have children, if it's a boy, throw it in the Nile, drown it. If it's a girl, it can live. And it was at this time that Moses was born. His mother kept him for 3 months. Mother and father kept him for 3 months. They saw that he was beautiful. But unable to keep him, she took a basket, filled it with pitch in and out so it wouldn't sink, and put Moses in it. And then put Moses in the Nile by some reeds where Moses' sister could watch. Pharaoh's daughter, not just anybody, Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket and had one of her handmaids take it out of the water. And here's what she said. Just a minute and I'll tell you. Whoops. Yeah. In Exodus 2, 3 through 9, it says, "But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it all over with pitch and tar. And she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him." So here she's kind of hiding in the reeds, seeing what's going to happen to the basket. "And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile. And she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying." Now remember, it was also a beautiful baby. What baby isn't beautiful? "And the boy was crying, and she had pity on him. And she said, 'This is one of the Hebrew children.'" From the get-go, Pharaoh's daughter knew that he was a Hebrew. So if you're thinking you're going to get a good history lesson from watching the Ten Commandments, you're not. And then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, this just gets better and better. So his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women that she may nurse your child?" Want to bet who she went and got? Mom! Who's got their hand up?
No, it's the slide needs to be advanced.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, maybe. Okay. Wait a minute. Am I ahead of myself? Yeah, okay. "Shall I go call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women that she may nurse the child?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. I'll not only let you take care of your child, I'll pay you to do it." Can you see the hand of God in all this and how he works? So then it says Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power and deeds. Yeah, just a minute. Let me read my notes for a change. There are those that think that Moses was a mighty warrior. And I think he was. Josephus mentions that he was a mighty warrior. But it says he was trained in all the ways of the Egyptians. Ancient historians write about about how intelligent Moses was. Josephus is one, Irenaeus is another, Philo another. So we have some ancient historians talking about Moses. It says he was learned in hieroglyphics, music, geometry, higher mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, literature, and the whole circle of arts and sciences. Moses was an intelligent guy. And to think that Pharaoh said, "Let's kill all the boys," Moses' mother puts him in a basket, and he is rescued by Pharaoh's daughter and brought up in Pharaoh's household in the royal court, educated. This is the finger of God. This is providence. But when he was approaching 40 years of age, it entered his mind to visit his brethren, the sons of Israel. Now, he knew who they were. He says, "You know what? I'll go out and visit with the boys." And he had it in his mind that he would be their deliverer. Not so fast. Not so fast. So when he saw one of them being mistreated, he killed the Egyptian who was mistreating him and buried him in the sand. And when he saw one of them being mistreated or unjustly, he defended him and took vengeance for the oppressed by striking down the Egyptian. And he supposed that his brother understood that God was granting them deliverance through him. But they did not. Does that sound familiar? Is there another story in the Bible kind of sort of like that? Everybody go like this, yes. Jesus. And Moses had, Moses had trouble for 40 years in the wilderness with these rebellious people. And we're out of time. So it was wonderful. It went fast. So I thank you. We'll start again in verse 22. We'll talk about Moses and all that he did for them. So until then, may God bless you and keep you.